So there's a lot of those who are communicating that and have everything under control.
I mean, but he knows most of the procedures that go, you know. So, I mean, probably.
He's got a good conversation.
Let's see what it is.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the November meeting of the Transportation Technical Coordinating Committee. My name is Matt Minier with the city of Jeffersontown. I'd like to ask Andy to call the roll.
All right, thank you very much. First on the list is Bullitt County.
Here.
City of Charlestown.
Here.
Thank you. City of J-Town.
Here. City
City of Jeffersonville. City of Mount Washington. City of Albany. City of Shepherdsville. Oh, that's all right.
Here.
There he is. Hey, Arthur. City of St. Matthew.
Here.
Clark County.
Here.
Floyd County. I think we're going to here shortly. Let's see. IDEM, usually don't. How about NDOT? Don't see anybody from NDOT on the line. Maybe they'll join us. Kentucky DAQ, don't think so. KYTC.
Regional planning here.
Hi, Cedro. District 5.
Tom Hall.
Hi, Tom. Anybody else?
Steve DeWitt, Steve DeWitt's here just listening.
There you are. You're caution moving vehicles. Thanks for joining us, Steve. Kipta is here. KYTC Office of Transportation Delivery. I'm thinking that there's nobody there because we kind of asked for KYTC. Here's one. Lowell Metro Air Pollution Control District.
We're here.
Me too, Craig.
Metro Economic Development.
Mike King.
Very special guest today, Mike King. Not special guest, but very special. Comment for Metro Planning and Design Services. Metro Public Works. There it is. I see you. I see you there. Airport Authority, don't think so. Riverport Authority. Oldham County.
Jim Urban here.
Jim Silliman, present.
Oh, it's the best days. Board of Indiana. Park Accessibility Advisory Council. Don't see Allie on the line. Town of Clarksville.
Mike Huffstown.
Hello, Mike. And TARC.
Aida Kovic.
Thanks for joining us, Aida. All right, and that just leaves us with our advisory members. Great attendance today. Thank you all for being here. Let's see, recognizing the advisory members. I think I saw Tanya and Nickton on the line. Thanks for joining us, Tanya.
Hello. Hi.
Good to see you. I don't believe we have any others. If I'm missing somebody, let me know. But again, thank you all for joining us. And with that, we certainly have a quorum, so let's get this meeting started.
Thank you, Andy. Next item on the agenda is the October TTC meeting minutes. Everyone should receive them in your packets. I ask if there's any corrections. And if not, I'd entertain a motion for passage.
Motion.
Got a motion, and is there a second?
Second.
Have a second. Is there any further discussion about the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Or raise your hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the Transportation Policy Committee reports, Andy.
Thank you. The TPC met on Thursday, October 26th here in this room. I'll go over a couple of highlights. More or less, it was kind of a similar meeting as our meeting last month, except in a shorter time frame. The highlights were Amendment 4 that were approved by the TTCC, were recommended for approval by TTCC last month, were indeed approved by TPC. The Amendment 4 is in the hands of our federal planning partners now. We've seen some movement of that this week, so hopefully we'll have an answer on or around the 30-day mark, so probably later this month about those projects for those interested there. The urbanized area boundary we updated that group as well, and TPC passed what we propose to be our metropolitan planning area. Just as a reminder, deleting the 0.1 square miles of Harrison County, Indiana is the change that we proposed and TPC approved. The quarterly, or we call it the quarterly report, quarterly update, that was Brady kind of summarized the events that we discussed for a while here last month at the TTCC. There's a little bit more on today's agenda about that, but those were approved in the same way they were recommended by this body back in October. And that's about it. I think I'll leave it there. There's some other procedural agenda items, but nothing to note, nothing else to note. That concludes our report.
Thank you, Andy. Any questions for Andy? Seeing the next item on the agenda is a public comment period. Greg?
Yes, we did not receive any public comments prior to the meeting, and I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A at this time, nor in the room itself.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Next item on the agenda is the Preston Corridor Plan. Andy?
Yes, so as I maybe hinted at a minute ago, Mike King from Louisville Metro is here today to talk about the planning study that was completed. Oh, he'll tell us when it was completed. I think it was a couple years ago now, or a year or two ago, on the Preston Corridor. There's a couple other plans that are kind of in the works to build upon that, I suppose. And so Mike's here today to give us a recap of that recent study. Mike, over to you.
Yep. Thanks everybody for having me here today. Give me just a second. Let me try and pull the screen up. All right, are you guys seeing my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
I'll make it even bigger for you, hopefully. All right, still good?
Yeah.
All right, appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me out. I think I know probably most everybody on the call, but just in case, my name is Mike King. I'm the director of the Office of Planning here at Louisville Metro Government. Gonna quickly, hopefully, go through the Preston Corridor Plan with you guys. This is actually a process that we started about probably 2 years or so ago, and are just finalized pretty recently. We've got one last little component that we're looking to finalize on this, but we're basically at the point now where we're hoping to start pursuing some activity along there. So this was basically the idea for the Preston Corridor Plan. It's a conceptual plan, sort of a vision for the future of the corridor. It was laid out in Move Louisville, which is the city's long-range multimodal transportation plan, and it suggested in Move Louisville to do what it refers to as complete street retrofits along several corridors throughout all of Louisville Metro. Preston is certainly one of those corridors, and the idea here is to sort of rethink Preston. There's a lot of issues that I'll go through a few of those here with you shortly, but there's a lot of opportunity as well. And Preston's a very interesting corridor. It's 13 miles long, so we're looking at the entire thing within Jefferson County, so all the way from Waterfront Park out to the Bullitt County line. It is the state route, State Route 61. And then as I dive into it a little bit more, it is a melting pot of Louisville along Preston, whether it be Preston Street or Preston Highway. Within a 10-minute walk of the corridor, there are 47,000 people that live in the area. It's a really interesting mixture culturally of who lives there, but also the character of the corridor itself. So if you think about sort of the urbanized area as you're further north along the corridor, it really has that feel of more of an urban street. And then as you continue to go south throughout it expands out into not quite a highway, despite it being called a highway, but it is really, really a very suburban sort of major arterial for freight and for vehicles and transit and everybody and anyone in between. One of the things that was really critical that we looked at through this process was the vulnerability of those populations that live along this corridor. When we talk about vulnerability, we were looking at things like socioeconomic status, housing composition, housing impact. One of the things that we heard loud and clear through a lot of this is like, hey, Preston, we would love to see investment along Preston and to make it better, but don't price me out of my home as you do this. So recognizing up front that there is this highly vulnerable population in various places along the corridor, we're trying to be very cognizant through this planning to make sure that this becomes an asset to the community, but not such that it pushes people out and kind of ruins some of the existing character and the coolness and authenticity that happens there along Preston in itself. Again, just like the cultural character of the corridor being so different, the functionality, as I kind of mentioned, is really different. Ranges all the way from 4,500 cars a day to 27,000 a day. Kind of increases the further south that you get, especially between 264 and 265. It's the third busiest transit route in all of Louisville. So there's a lot of obvious kind of regional destinations on there. When you think about the University of Louisville is very close to there, the medical districts being right along Preston, you've got the Fair and Exposition Center, you've got the airport, you've got UPS, you've got Ford, you've got Commerce Crossing. All these different components are served by Preston, and all of those things are accessed in different ways, and I think it's reflective of how many people are using that. There's some different barriers on the corridor. There are a lot of gaps in sidewalks. The crossing across Preston itself is quite a challenge. But then on top of that, just walking alongside of Preston can be a challenge. There's a big lack of bike facilities along the corridor. Transit, despite it being the third busiest route, isn't really prioritized in any way along here. And then just to top it all off, we put a giant railroad that goes right through the middle of it and cuts Preston in half to where there's actually a bisection of Preston right there at Burnett that basically everyone has to go around. There is a pedestrian bridge that goes across, but it's not very functional for a lot of users. But then again, as I mentioned before, it's a big freight route. So there's huge freight movement that comes along here. And when you have Amazons and UPSs and the airport and those kind of things, that seems pretty self-explanatory of why that happens there. One of the biggest challenges with Preston, is probably everybody on this call aware, is the safety. It is not safe for any kind of users out there. It averages 715 crashes per year, so almost 2 crashes a day. Since we started the study, we list here that there have been 13 fatalities. Unfortunately, as many times as we presented this, we can't keep up. I think it's actually up to about 17 or 18 fatalities along that corridor over just a couple of years. And that's reflected in sort of the level of safety service as we looked at this through our consultants, and I failed to mention WSP was the hired consultant that helped facilitate this plan for us and did a wonderful job. The safety of all users along the corridor was absolutely paramount, and something we just heard over and over and just jumped off the charts when you really start looking at the data itself. So all that to say that while we want Preston to have sort of a unified feel and a unified vision, you can't look at it as a one-size-fits-all solution on there. So we broke the corridor down into 7 different segments and looked at some treatments that, again, at a conceptual level, made a lot of sense for the individual nature of each of those segments. The things we looked at were kind of all the things that I talked with there, the safety, the multimodal, the traffic, the land use, as well as the demographics of who's living there and the needs of the corridor from the folks that live in the area. With that, we established a toolbox for both the transportation side and to a lesser extent, but still definitely included was from a land use improvement side. Too often, a lot of times when we do these planning studies, we look at the transportation side or we look at the land use side. We really tried to be inclusive to show, hey, you can't have one without the other. The two are so interconnected that we need to be mindful of it. So with this, we focused on facilities for all users and modes. So we wanted to be inclusive for all users. Premium transit was definitely at the forefront of this plan, and I'll get into that just a little bit more here in a moment. But as well as those sort of mobility hubs that serve. Not everybody lives along Preston, so you've got to be able to account for that last mile service that is out there so often. And then I'll get through the toolbox here in just a second, as well as the catalytic sites, which were kind of some of the ideas of the land use side. So like I said, sort of the toolbox, we looked at it in 3 different ways. And again, we had to be sort of aware of the needs of each individual segment and what those needed, and even to a more sort of micro level, some specific intersections or some specific segments of the road provide more challenges than others. So with those segments, we looked at sort of lane widths and if they're appropriate, if they need to be lessened, that multimodal implementation infrastructure, the lighting was a big thing we heard and probably contributes to a lot of the safety numbers that are along there. With the intersection, make sure we're being mindful of accessibility, the idea of removing some of the slip lanes or modifying those to maybe become right turn and bus lanes, curb extensions where applicable, and then the mobility hubs, which I kind of mentioned just a moment before we go. Again, we wanted to tie the land use to the transportation side, especially since there's such a strong sort of premium transit component to this. So for us to really be effective at having a successful, what ultimately was decided as a BRT system along here, we really needed to look at the land use. So we had our consultants look at 3 sort of what we called catalytic sites. And these aren't meant to be like, hey, these are the only places where these kind of developments should take place, but rather it's a, hey, here's sort of a downtown model, here's sort of a urban neighborhood model, and here's a more suburban model. And it looked at sort of the density, the design standards, some of the needs that would be pulled into those. So we looked at Broadway, Eastern Parkway, and Outer Loop. And again, these aren't specific like site development plans of like, hey, we need to build this thing here, but rather it's a framework that we can then use as a tool to, as development does come in, hold it to a little bit of a higher standard and maybe even update some of our land use policies and regulations to be reflective of these. I won't read this word for word, but hopefully everybody can see it okay. This is the vision that was established through public process, kind of taking the things that Move Louisville originally said, hey, this is what we need to look at and why we need to look at the Preston corridor. And then we established this vision for the corridor through a variety of engagement exercises. But ultimately, the gist of it, people want a complete street that's safe and comfortable for everyone to get around, that also promotes some economic development opportunities and also decreases some of the climate impact that Preston has on there. Again, I won't read through each of those, and I'd be happy to share the presentation with Andy and Greg afterwards if they'd like to send it out to the group. But there were specific objectives around all of that vision statement, focusing on everything of, we want to be inclusive of this corridor, make sure that Preston, you guys are all probably familiar with Louisville, that we love changing road names like every 3 miles just to keep you on your toes. Preston's one of those that actually from beginning to end, at least in the Jefferson County area, has the name Preston the whole time. So keeping that sort of Preston unity was really important. And then connecting everything in between through a variety of ways and really making that investment eventually into the infrastructure as a way for us to move forward better. We were really excited through the process. KYTC adopted their first complete streets policy, so we wanted to make sure that this plan was reflective of it, and it did meet all the criteria outlined by KYTC in their complete streets policy. As I mentioned, we had a very robust community engagement component to this. There was a community advisory group in addition to an advisory committee. The advisory committee were great partners with KYTC and TARC and Metro Council representatives that really had sort of a stake in it. So we were able to collectively work to say, hey, this is a viable concept for this. We got thousands of responses on surveys. We had pop-up events. So we feel like it was very reflective of the needs and the things that we heard from the community through this community engagement process that we did. Now I'm going to quickly, again, there's a ton of information on all of these, but I'm just basically going to go through a really fast overview of each of the little segments and just snippets of some of the recommendations for that area. So segment 1, which is Waterfront Park to Broadway, that's really kind of the medical district. If you think of it, to the north is a little bit more of kind of downtown and some of the larger offices, as well as some regional destinations like Waterfront Park, Sawyer Field, Lynn Family Stadium, those things. But the roadway itself really goes through the medical district. So the plan really talked about the need for some premium transit to come through here. But then one of the positives, if we were to do dedicated BRT through here, that could also be shared by EMS and emergency service vehicles, that it doesn't have to necessarily be exclusive only to the buses. It provides something that is a challenge. We heard from some of the folks in the medical district of it's tough for us to get our ambulances through here sometimes. But if those are dedicated lanes that are shared by a select few that are either emergency vehicles or getting more people through, that was one of the big takeaways from this section. Also talked a lot about the landscaping and the sort of sense of place components to this, while still maintaining a good LOS for vehicles to get through here. Section 2, Broadway to the railroad. I mentioned this before, but this is a huge challenge, that cut in the railroad. So many people were like, hey, we want a crossing, an at-grade crossing at Burnett where Preston breaks. We reached out, talked to the railroads. We turned every channel we possibly could to try and see if there was a solution. Ultimately, the only solution for a crossing there would be to either go over or go under the railroad. And to do that, despite the insane cost that it would do, it would also decimate a lot of the sort of character of that neighborhood there. So instead, this is where we looked at pivoting of, hey, we're not going to be able to get transit vehicles across right here. But the good side of it is if we use the little bit of a detour and go over to Brook Street, it can get us to that the northern point of the University of Louisville right there, where it can sort of become an anchor in a premium area to really emphasize the transit as well as the bike ped connections. We are trying to get sort of some ideas on a better bike ped connection over that section. Like I said, there's the bridge that's there now, but most people tend to say it's not very welcoming. So it is something we're looking at there. And then this is where it starts to sort of transition more from the sort of downtown, really urban, into eventually kind of a more suburban area. So segment 3 is the railroad crossing out to Locust Lane, which is basically where that cemetery is, right around the railroad overpass there at Preston. Again, focuses on BRT, dedicated lane BRT, but also adding bike infrastructure, considering a road diet potentially in that area, especially as it fans out, but also recognizing like, hey, we need to be able to connect better to the expo center. What if we had really good transit service that people didn't have to get in a car? They could go from a hotel downtown and get to the expo center and then comfortably walk in from there. Locust Lane to 264, this is where it really starts to transition into a little bit of a more suburban area. But again, based on the study, it looked like there could be some room for dedicated BRT transit lanes to come through here. As well as opportunities for better bike infrastructure. This was one of the areas that people were like, we really need to green this part of the corridor because it's really kind of hard and not very welcoming. Segment 5, 264 out to Tower Road, which is basically the railroad crossings. As you get further south along the corridor, again, still focuses on trying to keep the dedicated BRT lane going out there and the bike infrastructure that's continuous throughout, but also a lot of traffic calming in this area because this is where speeds get out of control, where it's really tough to cross. So the idea of potentially some access management ideas, bump outs, pocket parks, things like that you could put in there to make it to feel a little more pleasant. Segment 6 is that Tower Road out to 265. This is interesting because as we talked about the premium transit, it was like, hey, it'd be great to get out to Commerce Crossing. But the reality is we looked at the data, while there is certainly some ridership happening out there at Commerce Crossing in those places, it made a lot more sense, at least in the near term, as we start to think this BRT, is to, hey, let's end it at Outer Loop, then take it over to the Jefferson Mall as that being designated as a regional center based on our land development code and our comprehensive plan, that's sort of the southern anchor for this, and that becomes the area where we add a little bit more density and we really focus on the BRT transit. That's not to say transit service still wouldn't go out to Commerce Crossing. There still would probably be some service that goes out there, but the things that you think of with BRT in terms of dedicated lanes, frequency of service, consolidated stops, all those different components would go out to Outer Loop. And then the last and final section was 265 to Bullitt County, which, as I said, that one has the median out there. It's got the big berms on the side. So this was really focused on intersections were some of the challenges. If you think of like Cooper Chapel Road out there, I mean, I think it's 9 lanes wide in some areas trying to get across that. So ideas on how we could improve sort of sense of place, opportunities for those people that want to ride bikes, that want to walk, but still maintaining, because there is such a heavy freight movement, all the vehicle level of service out there. all that to say, here's a really confusing map that'll make zero sense for any of you to look at, but this is sort of all of it brought together and summed up as well as we can. This sort of triangle over here on the side is again, kind of the credence of what we were trying to do, which is sort of flip the traditional approach of let's focus more on people than on vehicles itself, but we still need to make sure they're included in this conversation. So the map kind of shows the extent of where the bus rapid transit would go, highlights some of the really high crash intersections that we need to improve on, looks at the buffers that we need to really focus on some of those land use, as well as all the sidewalk connections that are needed, which sort of segues into our next steps. Obviously, to build all of this out with just a conceptual plan would be extremely expensive. There's still a lot of planning in terms of like really fine-tuned design elements and things like that to go into it, but there are a lot of opportunities for us to do some quick wins. We were very fortunate this year that we had $2 million allocated by our Metro Council specific to doing some projects along the Preston corridor. $2 million, while it's a good chunk of change, doesn't go a long way in terms of doing a whole lot there. So we had one, which is really interesting, very focused meeting, and one of the problem areas kind of focused out there around Indian Trail in that area. And because of the population there, we actually did it as a Spanish-only meeting. So we hosted the Spanish-only meeting, got lots of feedback, and as a result, we're going to be able to do some more continuous sidewalks, potentially some lighting, cleaning up a couple of crosswalks are the ideas that came out of that. And then one other thing, because it is local funding that we have specific to us that we're really excited about doing, is this will be the first time, to my knowledge at least, that we as Metro have done what we're calling a percent for art. So with the $2 million, 1% of that will go towards public art to increase that sort of placemaking opportunity along the corridor. We're still fleshing out what exactly that artistic component is going to be, but we've already absolutely identified that those funding sources will be allocated with 1% going to public art and then the rest going to the sort of capital improvements along the corridor. That's probably all over the place on that. Again, it's hard to cover an entire roadway like Preston too quickly. So with that, I will shut up. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Is there any specific questions for Mike King on the Preston corridor plan? Great. Thank you for your time, Mike. Appreciate that. Next item on the agenda is item number 6, the 2024 TTCC officer nomination. Andy?
Thank you. TTCC bylaws state that our regular meeting held on the second Wednesday of November, the chairperson shall appoint a nominating committee for the officers to be filled at our next meeting in January. The nominating committee shall consist of 2 members, either voting or advisory, and the chairperson. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Meunier to seek, I guess, members of a nominating committee that would probably meet with me and him, a 20-minute Zoom call sometime in late November, early December to discuss the nominations.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Is there anybody who would like to express interest in joining me on this nominating committee? I need at least 2 people for that committee. If you are, you can raise your hand or signify by saying aye. I see Jim raise his hand. Is that Keith Griffey as well? I see. Okay. I have those 2 members in, Jim Urban and Keith Griffey. Is there anybody else? Great.
All we need was 2, so 2 works. 2 works
then.
Okay.
Does that need action to the?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take an action just to formalize it.
Okay. Entertain a motion to accept Jim Urban and Keith Irby and myself to the nominating committee for the 2024 TCCC officers.
I'll make that motion.
We got a motion and a second. Got a second. Any further discussion? All those okay with that, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is proposed administrative modification policy update. Chris?
Afternoon, everyone. And a little presentation for this one. Alright. So, we have a proposed administrative modification policy update for you all. This is an action item. So, first, before I get into what we're gonna propose, this is not working.
Or now?
Yeah, I think that's right. Thanks, Greg. Sorry. Really quick, y'all are familiar with this, but our current policy, actually, I think we skipped the slide, but it's okay. Our current policy is designed for minor changes to the transportation improvement program, but not to the long-range plan, the MTP. We don't need to present. Can you go back one slide?
That's it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. We don't need to present admin mods to the public, and they don't require TPC approval. They're information only because they are minor changes. And the objective is to have a faster method to make small updates when a high level of scrutiny is not necessary. So there are a few amendment considerations that are part of the story. Amendments can be used to update the TIP and the MTP both. Any project changes that are deemed regionally significant or affect air quality must be made through amendments. And amendments are, as some of you are well aware, more time consuming and can take up to 3 months. Okay. So administrative modifications, and you guys are familiar with some of these, they're typically used for the minor data entry errors, splitting or combining projects, as long as we're not modifying the original intent, changing, clarifying elements of the description, again, without modifying the original intent, updating funding categories, phase shifts, without the phase shifts that don't impact fiscal constraints, adding phases to existing projects, adding eligible new group projects, and sometimes for rollover provisions. So now I'm going to get to our proposed change. What we want to do is the administrative modifications, we'd like to make them to both the TIP and MTP, but only for one purpose. They can include an update to the estimated total project cost in the MTP when the project is in both documents. That's the only reason that we would want to be able to include MTP updates with admin mods. Previous staff specifically did not want to include MTP updates with administrative modifications. In a moment, I'll get into why this would be helpful to us. It's mainly an internal record keeping situation. So I put together a fictional example, and this is real financial numbers, but this is a fictional update. So what we would do, we'd add the top line that is in yellow, the MTP action, and the update would be to the total estimated project cost. I've got a project sponsor, Schmigadoon Transit, and what they would like to do is add a mere $6,000 or so to their fiscal year 23 transit capital phase. That's something that happens all the time in admin mods, but what that is causing is that we are updating the total cost programmed in the TIP, but right now with the current policy, we are leaving it at the 900,000 figure in the MTP, and that's just not really accurate. So what we'd like to propose is that we can make this update through an admin mod to the MTP as well as the TIP. And that's about all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
I would just add that this, we want the narrow scope here. We want a very narrow scope. We don't want to get in the habit of doing admin mods of MTP because that could get out of hand real quick, but this is a simple one just to keep those to financial dollars, financial numbers, the same.
I have a question.
Sure.
So since we've already have a new tip and we've already done several admin mods of it, would you just incorporate them in the same admin mod, or would it be like admin mod 1 of the MTP, but admin mod 8 of the tip?
Probably would
That's a
have to
good
be that.
question.
We can't go back.
So would they be two different like PDFs?
I wasn't visioning it that way.
I would say through the life of this MTP, it seems likely, yes. Yes.
Until this policy gets further down where it can happen at one time.
Yeah, and in 2 years' time, they would be adopted, new versions of both documents would be adopted at the same time, then at least we could start at one again.
But it normally has to be an MTP first before you can get to the tip, right?
All these projects would be in the MTP. It's not the
Yeah.
addition of any projects to the MTP.
Right.
It's just saying that using her example, that project, given the current policy in the MTP, it starts at 990,000 and it would be at 990,000 in the MTP until there was a new MTP. Okay, even though there's tip changes that have happened in the interim, more than once every 4 years from that MTP.
So it's not even an automatic, if you prove it and change it in the tip, it's kind of not an automatic that the MTP is updated?
That's right, the MTP is not updated. And the thought was previously that, just to be clear, the thought was previously that, this MTP is a long-range, 20-plus year planning document. We don't need to get into the minutia of a small dollar change. And that's probably as true as ever. However, for keeping track of how much these projects are costing, especially as they are always going up these days, this should be a clean way to keep the MTP in lockstep with the tip when there are these admin mod increases or changes. So again, it's a very narrow thing, a very narrow ability to admin mod the MTP. We do not want this to get out of hand.
But historically then, as cost increasing to the tip, we've never went back and modified the MTP to adjust that.
Correct.
And I guess there's really never been a need for that, or is that just, like she's saying, just to get to more accurate numbers where there's not that confusion out there, potentially either in the public's eyes or somebody else?
That's what it has created to be. Yeah, that's right.
I believe when we did the update, that would have caught everything up at that time.
That's right. So what I'm saying, we wouldn't have done that. We would not do that until every 4 years update. So if a tip or if a project has a life that spans multiple tips, and many do, with the MTP update, it would have gotten right at that time. So it got right earlier this year, in other words. But as there's been admin mods in the interim, we're off beat. Right?
Maybe I asked a question that overcomplicated it, of going back and thinking how to make it easier on you in terms of, we're not going to do an admin mod unless it's also in the tip. So maybe if it was just, the cover page, that admin mod 8 of the tip and then admin mod 1 of the MTP. Because I really like the process that you all have now where it's got MTP action, tip action at the top, one project, all there bundled together in one place. So I just wanted to encourage you to keep it together. That's why I was asking that question.
Well, I have a thought on that. So when we do amendments, we do have both of those boxes, right? And we had one amendment so far, I think it was the first one, and that was a tip only amendment. So when we got to amendment 2, we didn't call that amendment 1 in the MTP. We just have, so I feel, in my opinion, I think it would be good to follow that.
Call the next one 8.
Yeah, so if this gets approved, then admin mod 7 probably will be admin mod 7 that will be admin mod 7 to the MTP, even though 1 through 6 was irrelevant to the MTP.
We just host them on both sites that we do, like we do the amendments now, where we have the amendments on the MTP page as well as the tip page. We'll just do administrative modifications on both, because right now currently they're just on the tip page.
But if we do say administrative modification, could that one action handle the tip and the MTP updates then?
There's no action on admin mod.
So but it could all happen all in one number.
Yeah, there's again, we present them at each TPC meeting, but Chris always says, there's no action necessary, just
Information only.
And so it would be no different here. But we are seeking this committee's recommendation for that approval to go ahead and make this change or make this Again, subtle, not meaningful to many, but certainly meaningful to us internally. And I think for those of you that have projects that have, that fictional example it happens all the time, right?
A lot of people working.
In fact, we have several on deck, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That have happened that way and that we get right, you know, presuming that this gets approved by you guys and by TPC, that we would get right in the next month or so.
Thank you, Chris. This is an actionable item. Is there any other comments for Chris about this potential policy change? If not, I would entertain a motion to recommend approval of the TPC to permit the MTP total project cost updates through administrative modifications in cases where the projects are listed both in the TIP and the MTP. Is there a motion?
Motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raise your hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next item on the agenda is the MPO dedicated fund update. Brady.
All right. So last TTCC we had, this was quite the action item. But just as an update, restating what Andy said earlier, TPC did approve the 3 projects that were recommended for approval by TTCC in October, and the project Cooper Chapel Road Phase 3 that was recommended for denial by TTCC was not voted on at TPC. It was mentioned, discussed briefly, but it wasn't voted on. And then there were 4 projects that had requested a cost increase for these respective phases shown here in yellow of TA funds, of which we don't really have room to provide cost increases at this time. We're pretty well programmed out for fiscal year 26. So as a result of that, those requests were withdrawn. They weren't voted on at TCCC, and Little Metro since then has been working with KIPTA for an alternative way to potentially help these projects, specifically the 2024 projects, get started and get those projects going on these phases that need some extra money. So after discussion with Little Metro, this is the request, I guess. We have the 3 projects you see on top in green. We have KIPTA ID 2920, Blanton Lane Sidewalk right-of-way phase, fiscal year 24. Under this scenario would be increasing TA funds, $266,000. Then you see Gable Avenue Sidewalk, 2921, right-of-way 2024, increasing $264,000. Bernheim Lane Sidewalk and Road reconfiguration, KIPTA ID 2895, it's a construction phase, currently programmed for fiscal year 24, but in this scenario would move up to fiscal year, currently scheduled for fiscal year 27, and under this scenario would move up to fiscal year 24, and would also receive an increase of $288,000. To make this work to where we're not increasing the total amount of programmed TA funds, there would be federal TA dollars removed from currently programmed Little Metro projects. The first one being Crumbs Lane Sidewalk Phase 1, 2896, construction phase for 26, fiscal year 26. We would decrease the $503,000 you see there. We would also take away $315,000 from the 24 construction phase of the McNeely Louisville Loop, KIPTA ID 2539. And so if you do the math and you put all this together, that ends up in a net zero change in the total amount of TA MPO funding for these local metro projects. So it's a shifting around of TA funds for these projects, as opposed to what we would typically consider a a traditional cost increase. And then this is showing the carryover balance for fiscal year 23, 24, 25, 26. You can see that we're still in the black, I guess, for all of these fiscal years, showing that if all of these changes were approved, there is room for the changes in the budget as we know it today. I wanted to give Amanda, I don't know if you wanted to say anything specifically about these projects.
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to be heard today. Just to explain, the purpose behind this is to try to keep everything that's on schedule for 2024, those right-of-way phases for Blanton and Gagel, to get those started. They're ready to go now if we had the money. And Bernheim is ready to go to construction actually this year, but obviously it's in 27 and we don't want it to sit and wait for that long. So moving that up is one of the reasons why we needed to kind of also decrease the amount of funding somewhere else. And the reason why we chose Crumbs and McNeely to decrease the funding is we still very much intend to build both of those projects and find paths forward to fully fund them, but those two seem to be the most squishy where we could take from. Crumbs being, it's scheduled in 2026. It hasn't finished design yet like the others, and so we have more time to come up with a strategy to fully fund that, even if that ends up being overmatching on Louisville Metro's part. That gives us a couple years to convince leaders to do that. And the situation with the McNeely Louisville Loop project is the way it's currently funded right now, we only have about a little over half of the funding needed to construct the whole thing. We recently applied for a TA TAP state grant from KYTC to fully fund the whole thing, and we did not win that grant. So we're gonna have to come to terms soon on a decision on that project. Do we carve it in half and construct half of it? And if we decide to do that, the decrease in $315,000 would leave us enough money to fully fund that one section. Or do we delay that section to give us time to get more money to construct it all together? We haven't decided what we're doing with that yet. That's another problem. But either way, we have an extra $315,000 to give to the other projects that are ready to move forward now. So that explains why we were able to decrease those.
Thank you. Also, just a note.
Are you decreasing, like say Crumbs Lane, by that amount or to that amount?
To that amount.
To that amount, okay.
Oh, no, by that amount.
By
Sorry.
that amount,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Again, the amounts in green, those three numbers, the sum of those three equals the sum of the two red numbers.
Okay. So ultimately for the red number, you still have to come back and get to that additional amount that you decreased by then.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I was gonna mention to that point, that will be, there is no guarantee, I guess, that there will be TA dollars later for these projects or STBG, or there's no guarantee that will happen, but that's a risk Louisville Metro is planning on trying to work on, getting those funded in other ways like Amanda was talking about. And so unless there's any other questions, I would recommend a request PTC see action on these 5 Louisville Metro project funding changes.
Thank you, Brady. Andy, does these need to be taken separately? Can we do it?
Just as a single action.
All right. Seeing that, I'd entertain a motion to recommend to TPC to recommend approval of those TA project funding changes as highlighted in Brady's presentation. Was that a motion?
Second.
Yes.
Second.
And Jim Urban second. Is there any further discussion about the motion and the second and these changes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the regional commuting trends. Spencer?
Thank you. Ready to get my PowerPoint pull up here. Good afternoon. Here to talk about the regional commuting trends in the KIPTA region.
So a little introduction, the US Census Bureau released the 2022 ACS one-year estimates on September 14th. And as part of that data release, commuting to work data, which is part of table CPO3, provides comparative economic characteristics for the US in smaller geographies. So the commuting to work data, of course, is very useful to us because it gives us a good picture of kind of how trends in the region are as far as, you know, how many people work from home, how many people are traveling in single occupancy vehicles, walking, biking, carpooling, etc. This data looks at 2022 and compares it to 2021, 2019, and 2018, but 2020 was left out due to COVID and a lot of non-responses to the surveys. Sorry, that's a little small, but so here is the national trends. Some of the highlights: single occupancy vehicle share has increased from 67.8% in 2021 to 68.7% in 2022, but it's still below 2018 and 2019, which were around 76%. All of these data points I'll point out too are statistically significant. Carpooling share has increased from 7.8 to 8.6% from 2021 to 2022. But carpooling was still lower nationally than 2018 and 19, which was around 9%. Public transport increased from 2.5 to 3.1, but it's still lower than pre-pandemic, which was around 5%. And of course, you know, work from home is much higher than 2018-19 when it was around 5.5%. But it actually decreased from 2021 to 2022 from 17.9% to 15.2% actually. So here is Jefferson County. Some things to point out. So you know, on the table, single occupancy vehicle is car, truck, or van drove alone, because there's also car, truck, or van carpool. And then other is bicycle, motorcycle, taxi cab, helicopter, airplane, you know, boat, I guess, you know, Uber. Mostly, yeah, mostly bicycle. From the other census tables I looked at, which was parts out on like very large geographies like state and national. You know, like 3% of the whole United States chose other, 2.5 of that 3% was bicycle. It would break it down a little more on those bigger geographies. Some of the highlights, statistically significant more workers in 2021 than in 2021, 19, and 18 in Jefferson County. Slight increase in single occupancy vehicle travel in 2022, but well below 19 and 18 levels. Increase in carpooling, and it pretty much matches the 2018 level. Public transport decreased from 21 to 22 and is still below pre-pandemic levels. Less people walking than before the pandemic compared to now. A slight increase in other, you know, the biking, motorcycle, taxi cab. I'm assuming, like I said, most of that increase would be biking. Work from home decreased from 21 to 22 from 16.4 to 14.4%, but it's still way above pre-pandemic levels, which are around 5%. And then despite, all of this is pretty interesting, but I thought one of the more interesting things was, even though work from home has increased a large amount, the mean travel time to work it's actually higher than 2019 and 18. A little bit, like 0.1 minutes, but I thought that was pretty interesting that, you know, I think it kind of shows that traffic in Louisville, maybe compared to some larger cities, isn't as bad. It'd be interesting to look at Nashville, Cincinnati, or maybe a larger city and kind of see the trend. I know nationally, mean travel to work time is still lower than pre-pandemic, but it has gone up since 2021. All right, so here's Bullitt and Oldham. In 2021, Bullitt County didn't have enough of a sample size, so there wasn't data for 21 for Bullitt County, and then the same thing for 2019 in Oldham County. But some notable things, similar to the national and regional trends, similar to Jefferson County, higher single occupancy vehicle travel in 2021, 2022, likely due to, commuting to the urban core, a little bit less work from home. Large drop of work from home in Oldham County. It went from 21.4 to 15.3%. And then carpooling levels are above pre-pandemic levels, but they're decreasing a little bit in Oldham County. You know, speculative on my part, but I think, you know, possibly the lower rate, the gas price decreasing, although the state is from 2022. So, you know, I would think that that would show up more in 2023. So maybe next year we'll see how that looks. All right, got Clark and Floyd. Notable things, Clark was pretty interesting. They had an increase in workers, just like in Jefferson County. Other increased a ton. It went from 0.1% to 3.2%, which essentially means that 59 people in 2021 said they biked or motorcycled or whatever to work, and now 2,069 people said that. So that was pretty interesting. I'm like, that's, you know, that's a huge increase in, I'm assuming, people biking. Single occupancy vehicle went down in Clark County from 21 to 22, and there were also more people carpooling. Walking increased in Clark County, work from home decreased, just like the same trend around the region in the United States, from 14 to 13%, 14.5 to 13. And travel time actually went down. So most places travel time went up, but is below pre-pandemic levels. Theirs actually continued to decrease. So that was really interesting. Floyd County workers were essentially the same. No statistically significant changes from 21 to 22. Follows the regional trends on increasing single occupancy vehicles and decreasing work from home. And their travel time actually went up above pre-pandemic levels. And I'm assuming that's probably Sherman and Bridge.
What I would say.
So that was my thought on that. Here's the MPO. The census doesn't release data like this on the MPO geography. So I put together the two complete sets I have, which were 2018 and 2022. Since 2020 didn't have any data, 19 didn't have any for Oldham, and 21 for Floyd. But also the significance test field are blank, since I created this myself, and the census, you know, didn't provide the significance testing part. But they follow regional trends. They follow, of course, you know, Jefferson County is a huge part of the weighted average here. So it looks very similar to the same trends. Jefferson County decrease in work from home, a little bit of an increase in single occupancy vehicle, higher than pre-pandemic levels of carpooling, but definitely lower public transit. And then something else we decided to do that we thought would be interesting to look at was, if we took work from home out of the equation, what do the shares look like? And the share looks a lot similar to pre-pandemic levels. So if you take out work from home, you know, single occupancy vehicle travel definitely looks very similar to before the pandemic. It's only like 1% lower. Carpooling actually is probably the biggest increase, and then public transportation is the biggest decrease. But you know, I think that's an interesting picture to paint. It's like, of the people who are still driving to work or going to the office, they're using the same means perhaps, but you know, so work from home is definitely what caused the trends that we've seen. So here's the Louisville MSA. This includes Clark, Floyd, Harrison, and Washington counties, Indiana, and then Bullitt, Jefferson, Oldham, Spencer, Shelby, and Henry. Trimble is not included. They actually aren't part of the Louisville MSA anymore as of the 2020 census. Some notable things, same trends as before. I'll go to the next slide real quick because it has more of them on there. Single occupancy vehicle remain the same, but it's still well below pre-pandemic levels. Carpooling increased from 21 to 22, and it's higher than, to say lower than pre-pandemic. Public transit remained the same from 21 to 22, but well below pre-pandemic levels. And then work from home decreased from 21 to 22, and of course much higher than 2018, 19. And then kind of did the same analysis. We took the work from home out, and it's kind of the same picture as the MPO counties, where the share of each mode of travel looks a lot more similar to pre-pandemic levels without the work from home. Well, I think that's pretty much all I have. Anyone has any questions?
Can you remind me, was this based on where people live or what county they worked in?
It is based on where they live.
Yeah, so it's resident, yeah, so a person that lives in Oldham County and works in Jefferson County, they would show up as Oldham County.
Yeah, so, yeah, because it's based on the ACS questionnaire. One of the questions would be, you know, like, they even have you give like the address of where you work, like what time you leave and come back, how far you drive, what mode of travel you use to get there. They actually give it a little bit more options. I actually looked at the questionnaire a couple days ago, and they kind of group it together, and that's like the other, like they'll actually have a checkbox for bike or ferries, even one of them. But they group them together for this, I guess, to show.
If we can get the good data on it too, I think a good partner with this data will be the during the work flow data. And we've used that many times over the years. And sometimes it's easier to get, or sometimes it's a special tabulation or whatever it's called, the CTPP, the Census Transportation Package. Some of those things have changed over the years, and so maybe it's not an apples to apples thing, but it would be curious to see, are people crossing county lines to go to work more than they used to? You know, that seems like the hypothesis could be, hey, if I can work from home a couple of days, I can live where I want to live, and then that long commute, I'll suck it up and do that 2 or 3 days a week or something like that.
Can you extrapolate from that if people are returning more to work versus remote?
It would seem that way. I would also say that, you know, maybe like when people get hired into new positions, maybe they're not being offered work from home as much, or, you know, something of that nature. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, you know, that'd be something definitely to dig more into.
Well, I think the 2023 data a year from now, or whatever, will help illustrate that, right? Because 2021 to 2022 shows by and large that fewer people are working from home in 22 than in 21. 21 was the high watermark, if you will, working from home, or 2020 surely was. 21 was still real high, 22 is a little bit lower. Are we still trending down? What 2023 data would tell us, or not? Or maybe
I think what was interesting too is there were, especially in Jefferson County, there were like a good percentage more workers in 22 than in 21, 19, 18, like 20 or 30,000 more, like, you know, and the percentage still went down. So it seemed like people would be returning, and, you know, the share of new employees, I guess people that have maybe moved or re-entered the workforce is also returning.
That's what's coming up in economic development discussions, are people returning to work, increasing the workforce, or getting them back in track, talking with commercial brokers versus actual business owners. Plus, from a municipality standpoint, you know, how is that impacting our tax revenue? People working from home, that comes up. Is this trend anywhere on your website? Can we get a copy?
Yeah, I can send out. I have like copies of all the tables just came from my Excel sheets that I created.
The other thing that might lead to at least maybe a slight bit of uncertainty is, I think typically on the question, well, it depends on how the person fills out their ACS questionnaire, but I think ideally it should be to your primary job. You know, lots of people have multiple jobs, and so I might commute, I might work from home for my main job, but I might go do a gig here or there or something. It should be your primary job, and that's always the struggle with employment data. One of the struggles is how many jobs are there and how many people are actually working those jobs. If some of us have 4 jobs or something.
Well, we've been trying to use data like this to even project the revenues for our budget stream, because, you know, we've decreased what we thought a lot of our occupational revenue would be, you know, through the pandemic, because we were anticipating a lot of people working from home. So, you know, from a municipality standpoint, we have to budget for that decrease in potential revenue. So this is a good positive move from what I'm hearing you say, that maybe the trend is kind of coming back, and it might even come back better than what it was prior.
I'm assuming this data is also people who say that they work from home full time. How would it account for someone who works from home 2 days a week?
That's what I was about to say. Like,
I mean, that part has to be.
I think the part that the questionnaire probably misses the most is hybrid.
Yeah.
You know, so like if jobs have added, you know, like what would I say if I answered it? You know, we work from home 1 day a week. of course, I spend the majority of the office, so I would say I go with the office, but I think it asked like, how did you do this yesterday, or how did you do this last week? I can't remember the exact wording of the question, but it was, if it happened to be your work from home day and, fill it out that way.
On the, journey to work, where are people coming from to work in J-Town or Google Metro? We have that streetlight subscription, so if there's something like that that you're interested in, feel free to hit us up, me or Jeremy Shaw, Jeremy's here, but hit us up for just, we can see what you're trying to look at, and we can probably find run a pretty easy query in that regard, to at least say, hey, in the mornings, people are, X thousands of people are coming to work at River Ridge, and they're coming, some are coming from Charlestown direction. A good chunk are crossing the bridge from Kentucky, but the vast majority of them are elsewhere in Clark County or something.
How
like
many's
that.
coming from Louisville, to Indiana, and living and staying with River Ridge? Because our housing over is just busting loose. They can't keep up.
So, from say, please ask us for some of those things, because it helps us justify keeping the streetlight subscription so that we can do more things like this for longer into the future. If we use it, then we'll keep it. If we don't use it, we'll be forced to get rid of it, most assuredly. So ask questions. If we can't answer them, we'll say we can't answer them, or that's, but please do ask.
Yeah, I think one more note, I think something else that would be really interesting to see, I know I've looked at like the journey to work data, and like you click on somewhere like Jefferson County, and you'll see it go to like other countries, because someone either goes to other countries to work, or maybe they work remotely for an international company, or a company in a different state. So I'm curious to see how people answer the questions as far as like, if you work for Google and when you live here, like, do you say you work in California because officially they think you work there, and or do you put here? I don't know how that works.
Depends how you answer. I think some people throw off too. They're like, I don't trust this. I'm not responding truthfully. Because I remember we had one year I was looking at that, and it was from Kyrgyzstan. And while it's possible that somebody commuted to Kyrgyzstan on a given day, I don't think we have many commuters commuting to Asia on a daily basis. So I'm like, it's a funny name country. No offense to Kyrgyzstan, but it's got a unique name.
Question. Do you know if the mean travel time work is for all months put together?
I believe so.
Should be.
Yeah.
Should be.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can segregate by month?
Sure. Yeah, to look into that. I mean, it's, I would say in like our region, it probably wouldn't, like, it's probably heavily dominated by vehicle travel in general, because it seemed like, 85% of the travel was either carpooling or in a single vehicle. But
good question. I don't know. I don't think so. Probably not. Probably it's one number for all the commuters, but
I should be aware of, segregate. Yeah, which would be that 1 million total for our analysis. Yeah, okay. Mean travel time.
oh yeah, it'd be good. Yeah, for sure. It'd be good to have knowledge of it.
Well, once we all get microchipped, it shouldn't be a problem.
It'd be really good. Yeah.
we already got these things.
Yeah.
Just hope there's jobs for us if they can.
Yeah. Thank you, Spencer.
Thanks.
Is there any other questions for Spencer? Next item on the agenda is Amendment 5 schedule. Chris?
So this is a pretty quick one, just kind of one important slide for you all. Got a proposed schedule for our next amendment.
Oh, almost.
We lost it.
It's worth waiting for. Okay. Really good, we promise.
I'm jinxing my presentations today. Okay. All right, so as we head into the holidays, this is what we've come up with. And I want to start by saying at least unless I'm missing something, we do not have any amendment level project updates on deck right now. And if it turns out that no one needs to do an amendment update, we can kick this out another month. But, as of right now, nobody's asking. So what our proposal would be to use December 15th to get any new or modified project applications in. Gives folks a bit of time to plan for that, and it would also be shortly after the next Indiana MPO dedicated quarterly meeting as well, if something comes out of that. If we start then, hitting all the necessary dates on the schedule, that would put us to a TPC approval of February 22nd of next year. And, yeah. As a reminder, minor updates can be made with admin mods, and project applications can be submitted at any time. I have an admin mod with a number of projects, including everything that we asked for recommendations of approval, TPC approval on deck now. So there will certainly be an administrative modification coming at the end of this month. But those are admin mod changes. This is for the changes that require more scrutiny. And no actions requested. Just FYI, if anyone has any thoughts or questions, let us know.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris?
I have a question. So if you're saying you received no applications, no one says they need an amendment, and there's no KIPTA committees in December, could you still email us and let us know kind of, is it a go or not?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason we have to get to February unless there's something urgent. We just want to put that out there since we.
I mean, honestly, I'll be really surprised if no one needs an amendment.
That may be something.
Yeah, but as of right now.
I suppose it could go the other way too, like if there's not move forward, but rather if somebody has something and it's not gonna be ready by December 15th, we might say, okay, let's just call it for that and say that nothing's urgent at that time, and but you have something, we'll call it March.
Oh, one final thought, if there's anyone out there who is like, hey, what about that thing? I forgot something, please let me know, because right now I don't think I've got anything. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Next item on the agenda is the 2024 TTCC schedule, right?
Yes, the dates for next year's TTC meetings are in your packet. We will continue the second Wednesday of the month at 1 o'clock, hybrid format, meeting in here as well as online. Our next scheduled meeting will be January the 10th, as we'll take December off, and we'll plan to do that as next year as well. Probably next month, I will send out just a list of these again, just to everybody, all the TTCC members, just so you can go and put it on your calendar. And then I'll continue to send out the meeting notices like a week out with the packet as I do right now. For people that are, just a little housekeeping note, people that are on the TPC, again, we're not gonna have a TPC meeting until November 30th. That's gonna be hybrid, or that's gonna be online only. Next week at the Shelbyville Conference Center will be the annual board meeting. That's at 11 o'clock. And then luncheon will follow that. And at 10 o'clock, the RTC will meet there as well. So that, I'll take any questions I got any, but that's it.
Thank you, Greg.
Yep.
Next item on the agenda is other business. Andy, is there?
Couple things. One, I mentioned earlier that Tanya is the only advisory member. I failed to recognize Bruce Bone from Trimark, so thank you for joining us today, Bruce. And then also, Larry Summers joined us. Larry's still on there? Yeah, he's still on there. His name's still on there. So I want to thank Larry for being here today from New Albany. And then, Kyle, do you have something real quick? Kyle's got something real quick.
Just real quick, I want to make you all aware of a new grant program by KYTC, the Creating Vibrant Communities Grant. It's open for LPAs with less than 200,000 people. So sorry, The program is designed to help communities plan for land use, transportation, and future development in a site or targeted area of the community. So you can see the website up right there. If selected, this community will work with KYTC to create a plan that will outline a vision, a conceptual development plan, and the next steps to create a unique destination for the community. There's no required match. However, KYTC will only be selecting 3 applicants, so will be pretty competitive. And it's due December 11th. So,
Thank you, Kyle.
This can be found on our, funding opportunities page. It's on our tip page as well.
And I just dropped it into the chat, so if anybody online wants to click on that link real quick, it's right there.
And I'm looking at that grant right now. So.
Good. Well, I hope we get one, or I hope that Kip the Region gets one.
Okay.
Hope it does.
Being that there is no other business before this committee, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion and a second, Jim?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, motion carries.